All right, everybody, welcome back to the Team Coaching Zone. Here we are on St. Patrick's Day on March 17th, and it's great to be back in the zone. We have returning to the show, Michelle Chambers. Michelle, great to have you. And a new guest on the show, Sebastian Fox. So welcome, Sebastian and Michelle.
Thank you.
Thank you, Krister. Delighted to be here.
Yes, delighted to have you. And Melissa, I see you're sporting the green today. I have done my best to dig out my one green shirt in honor of
I'm very, very proud of you. Banachty Lefela Porrick. Happy St. Patrick's Day, and wishing all our listeners all around the world a happy St. Patrick's Day and a peaceful St. Patrick's Day.
Indeed. I was just looking up again to remind myself what this holiday is about, and it turns out that what I discovered that this commemorates St. Patrick, who is the patron saint of Ireland, and it morphed into kind of a cultural event, religious, cultural celebration, etc., celebrating Irish culture and this patron saint. So
it's absolutely amazing. And did you also discover that St. Patrick was Welsh?
I didn't. So this is new. I'm getting my education today.
I did not know that.
I also just have read that wearing green makes you invisible to leprechauns. So for our global listeners who may not be familiar with what a leprechaun is, Melissa, do you want to share a little bit about what a leprechaun is?
Well, a leprechaun is a mythical, I guess, icon associated with Ireland in terms of having a magic pot of gold that you would see at the end of a rainbow. So I think really what it speaks to is, you often hear of the luck of the Irish. So it speaks to that. I don't know if you've also heard, Krister, that the Irish have the gift of the gab. Do you know what that means?
Yes, I do know what that
means.
I won't say any more. But that's perfect.
And I'm hoping
this.
It's perfect for this, right? Because that's what our conversations are all about. It's creating a learning conversation where essentially, we're all just coming together, having a cup of tea, having a cup of coffee, and exploring some interesting topics that going on in the team coaching field in organizations that might be of interest to our listeners. So, Krister, do you want to tee us up for this conversation? And
Let's do it.
Right in.
And I think this was really stimulated by a paper that Sebastian authored and invited a number of team coaches in his research. And we actually invited a few of them today. We initially were having Tara Nolan, but she wasn't able to make it. So we were able to pull in Michelle Chambers. We might also be joined by Dorothy Siminovich as well, who we've had on the podcast before. But let's start with Sebastian, as he's new to the podcast. And I think it was his paper on the topic of presence in team coaching and presencing that led to this episode. And Melissa, maybe you'll be able to share a little bit more about what attracted you to that topic and that paper. But Sebastian Fox, little intro here, is a team coach working with executive and leadership teams to help them learn and change in service of becoming more effective. He's the head of research at the Team Coaching Studio and is currently undertaking a doctorate in coaching and mentoring at Oxford Brookes University in the UK. So welcome, Sebastian. I empathize with you around getting the doctorate. So kudos to you on that. And hopefully you'll get across the goal line soon. And great to see that you are head of research at the Team Coaching Studio. We've had Georgina Woodster on a number of times. And it would be wonderful to have the Team Coaching Studio back. So Georgina, if you're listening in the Team Coaching Studio, great to have one of your colleagues with us. Joining Sebastian is Michelle Chambers, second time, I believe, on the Team Coaching Zone. I think she was on with Carissa in season 2. She's a global executive team and leadership coach, culture and strategy advisor, and an organization development consultant. She's an author and a speaker and the International Coaching Federation Prism Award recipient. She's the Chief People, Culture, and Strategy Officer at Chambers and Associates and Teams Matter, and is a global certified team performance coach and senior faculty member at Team Coaching International, a great program by the late great Phil Sandahl, who I've been trained in that methodology as well. So, welcome to you, Michelle.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah. So this topic today, we'll be kind of exploring around the idea of presence, the presence of the team coach, presencing as kind of an active practice as well as team coaches. And we will kind of explore that. I think the way we got a little bit present today already was around connecting around St. Patrick's Day. And obviously, there are other ways we could be getting present. But Melissa, I think this episode was really something that you were the mastermind behind. So I'm going to invite you to say a few words about what it was about Sebastian's paper and this topic that, inspired us to bring this group together.
Yeah, well, first of all, I guess I'm, finalizing my own doctorate at the moment in the area of team coaching. And one thing that I've been reviewing is all the papers related to team coaching. And it was great to see in 2021, 22, 23, we're starting to see more team coaching papers come through. There was kind of a bit of a gap for a while. And this one in particular, Sebastian, really intrigued me because of the idea of presence and presencing, being around this whole idea of use of self. And when I reflect on my own team coaching practice, I know that is the forefront as to how I am in the room. And I lean on use of self quite a lot to navigate where I need to be in the session, whether it's moving from, structural coaching to more emergent coaching, whether I need to name something in the room, so on and so forth. So I was kind of hooked into it from that aspect. And then, of course, when you have a few more reads of it, you can kind of see different nuances and depths to it. So I thought it would be really interesting to have you and some of the colleagues that you surveyed, a lot of which were master certified coaches, just to kind of really explore this topic and learn a bit more about it.
Yeah, so thanks for sharing your views of the work there, Melissa. And I think for me, and partly to answer your question, Krister, from earlier, I think presence is something that perhaps we don't necessarily think a great deal about when we're training to be coaches. And I'm generalizing, of course, but there tends to be quite a lot of focus on doing team coaching. And I think what I've learned as I've become more experienced and spent more time reflecting about my own practice, it's actually much more about being a team coach. And there's lots of people who've written about that, of course. And that really started getting me interested in what does that actually mean? And I understand the doing bit. I can go and learn a model, and I can learn a process, and I can go and do that. Isn't that team coaching? And very quickly realized, well, no, actually, that's not the sort of team coaching that I felt I was drawn to. And recognizing, of course, there are lots of different forms of team coaching, but from my perspective, I really wanted to try and understand what actually being a team coach meant, and starting to talk to experienced team coaches, it very quickly became clear that it centers around presence, really. And and again, at a fairly superficial level, I thought I understood what presence was, and started trying to sort of make sense of that from my own practice, and found it quite difficult, if I'm honest. And that kind of led me to think, well, actually, what is it that I'm trying to understand here? What is this thing that's presence? And hi, Dorothy. Opportune moment to join us.
Yeah. Hi, Dorothy.
And trying to understand what presence actually is, and reading quite a lot of books, and not least of which Dorothy's work in this area. But that then led me to follow a curiosity around trying to find out more about it. And there were other things that were going on that meant I was quite interested in doing some post-grad research anyway. And it just seemed to be a sort of a linking of the two, synergistic moment that led me to think that, well, actually, there's an opportunity to look at presence in team coaching, because going back to what you were saying earlier, Melissa, there's not much actually written about team coaching per se. There's very little written about presence in team coaching, although quite a lot in dyadic coaching and counseling and therapy. Mm-hmm. So it seemed an opportunity to start filling that gap and talk to people who were master practitioners, because chances were, and fortunately proved correct, that they'd already done a lot of the thinking and heavy lifting in terms of understanding what their presence meant for them and how it might impact the way they coach. So that's where I ended up interviewing them. Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. Well, in the spirit of being present, let's honor our new guest, Dorothy Simonovich, Dr. Dorothy Simonovich, who just joined. Dorothy, great to see you again. We had Dorothy on the first season of the Team Coaching Zone podcast, and really recommend listeners go back and listen to that episode along with the one we did with Michelle. But interestingly, we'll just give a brief introduction to Dorothy, and then I'll tell a quick story, which I did share in the first episode. But Dr. Dorothy Simonovich, she's a master certified coach, and she's a global executive coach, speaker, and author, and director of coach training, presence awareness, and somatic coaching. She's the founder and director of the Training Gestalt coaching program based in both Istanbul and in Toronto. So Dorothy, great to have you back on the Team Coaching Zone.
Thank you so much, Krister, and dear Presence team. It's an honor to be part of your conversation this morning. Thank you. Thank you, Sebastian, for the invite. Yeah.
Can we find you in Istanbul or Toronto today, Dorothy?
Well, I just have to say I'm in Toronto, and to all my friends in Istanbul, Toronto looks good. The invitation of it, but the topic of presence. I love that you're having this conversation this morning, Krister. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Well, just a quick story. Probably about 15 years ago, I don't know how far back it goes. Actually, I was on a team and we hired Dorothy actually to come work on us as a team coach and as a practitioner. And she spent a couple of days with us, and it was really powerful work. And, you know, I just reflect on the power of the beginning, the middle, and the ends of that process with Dorothy. Being a master Gestalt practitioner and coach, her presence was quite powerful during those days, and I still remember that fondly. So good memory, Dorothy. I'm sure lots have intervened between then and the last episode we did and now. But maybe we'll bring it back to Sebastian, because I think both Dorothy and Michelle, and what did you have, up to like 9 or 10 master practitioners that you were studying and researching around the topic of presence?
Exactly, yes.
Yeah. Do you want to say anything more about kind of maybe some of the headlines of, you know, or maybe we go back to a little bit before getting into the research, is what is presence and presencing? Maybe we could kick that around a little bit, because I think I heard in the warm up when we were just meeting that was one of the first questions you asked those you were interviewing in the study.
Yeah, so you know, I think it's important, obviously, that Michelle and Dorothy answer on their own behalf. So let me take a step back and say that one of the things that did come out was there's no real standard definition of presence. You know, you ask 9 different people what they understand by presence, and I got 9 different responses. So I was interested really in trying to see, understand what the commonalities in those descriptions might be. And, you know, those are, I think, around it's how you show up. It's how you do you, to quote Georgina. It's a sum of your history, everything that you bring to the moment. It's your experience. You know, it's what happened to you, that morning. So complex is not a simple concept that you can sort of switch on and off. It's always there, and the question is, how conscious are we of it? So I'm going to pause there and let Michelle and Dorothy chip in.
I love that question, Krister, because Sebastian asked, and I'm like, but aren't you the one doing the interview? How do you define presence, right? He's doing it back to me as a coach. I want to hear about your definition. And I think for me, like Melissa, we were talking about earlier, a lot of that comes to me about the use of a self as instrument of change, and studying that and being aware of that in the work by Dr. Mia Young. And it's not just about being present in the moment, like tuned in with where the team is at, the structure, the process, the content. It's about being in the moment with the team and really being able to see what they're experiencing, it to feel it, and to recognize the impact that that has on me and the impact that I have on the team that I'm working with too. I'm going to turn it over to my fellow Torontonian, Dorothy, because she's the expert in this. So.
Michelle, thanks for even suggesting that, which I'm not, but I think we all are. What I'm aware of, and Melissa, I want to say just St. Patty Day hello to you.
Thank you very much indeed. I appreciate it, and best wishes to everybody in Canada, which I know are big fans of St. Patrick's Day.
Well, and in America, I mean, I think the Irish is part, talk about being present, and I think it's the luck and the charm and the magic of the Irish. I just these days there is more story that can engage you than I don't know what. So I just want to hold that and maybe even welcome that for this moment. Yeah, but so I'd like to say a couple of things if I could. Could I?
Please
do.
Chris, yeah. So I just think it's interesting that for all of us as a panel, but for the greater world now, between science and art, this topic of presence has emerged as so. Talk about St. Patty's, magical. It's invisible, but we know it when we see it. We know it when someone has it, and it's so different across. It's idiopathic. It's different among all of us, and yet it's something in common in terms of charisma, in terms of trustworthiness. So, Sebastian and I have been talking about this ever since we met a few years ago. And Michelle, you've been writing about it in, the aspect of leadership. And so, Melissa, I even hear you referencing it too in the little bit that I just heard backstage. But I think for all of us now, presence is this immediate sense that we have of others, of a person. Are they real? Are they real now? And by real, I want to use the word authentic in a debriefing way. Is are they coming from interior to themselves, not something outside themselves for convenient, but something that is core to who they are. So we know it's them, it's the real person. And so presence immediately conveys a sense of listen to them. It immediately, our brain, our mirror neurons, our sense of us gets interested when we're meeting someone who feels real and is embodied by whatever that is, their mission, their vision, their sense of themselves. Lately I've been calling presence a being intervention, how they just turn up. And then the second part of it, and I always just say this to you, Krister, the years since that incredible interview that you interviewed me, but you actually set the tone of how we engaged. I've never actually had that conversation with anyone. How we use our presence, how we respond to the challenges in the moment, so that do we have the range of capacity in the data of the moment, the challenge of the moment. And so there's a difference between presence in terms of being and the activation of that, which is use of self. So I want to just say that with some excitement and pause.
Love that. Yeah. And maybe just to pick that up, I love the distinction around the doing versus being of team coaching. And Sebastian, I think you rightfully said that when folks are especially learning to do team coaching or being of team coaching, where emphasis tends to be on the doing. And so we're very fixated on models, skills, techniques. We have a lot of anxiety when we go in to actually do team coaching, and then that even more makes us double down on our plan and management of anxiety. So we have structure and plan, which oftentimes has the opposite effect. Yeah. But I know in some of my conversations with Georgina, we spoke about the idea of Shu Ha Ri, right, which comes from the martial arts, but was really popularized in Agile, which is the whole idea that you have to first learn something, then that's the Shu. The second step, the Ha, is starting to then detach yourself from what you've learned. That's the attachment to the form. And then you can start to move on to kind of mastery and really kind of creating your own signature way of doing it. So I think it's natural that there's kind of an initial tendency to overlean towards the doing versus the being. But I think, for us to really fully step into the role of a team coach, we have to embrace the being. And my experience around that is a lot of it came with experience itself.
Yeah.
But the coach training around using the full body, not just talking in the mind, but embodiment and somatic, methods and the like, really can help with that. But I'm curious what you guys think about this thing around just the journey of the team coach, and when is it realistic to think that team coaches can really start stepping into this? Maybe we could do a better job early on, but I'm just wondering about the learning curve. Yeah.
It's so interesting you say that, because I note in the paper you reference Bill Torbert, and as I'm kind of thinking about this conversation, it really reminds me of Bill Torbert's work and the whole idea of adult development theory and where we might be in our own development and how that might show up in terms of our presence and our ability for presencing. So if you think of, in those very early days, we're trying to learn the expertise. So therefore, I'm turning up a lot in my head as expert. But then as we start building more capacity to do the work, we start moving beyond, kind of showing up just as expert into the next version of ourselves. And depending where we are in anything that we're trying to master, I do believe that we're all at different continuums of that. So if I even take, I've been lecturing MBA students for 12 years. And at the very start of walking into that classroom, I was completely in my own head. And, it was just a cognitive, am I, showing up as competent here, all of this self-questioning, all of this kind of self-doubt. And of course, that showed up then in my transactions in the classroom, in my ability to engage in good conversations in the classroom. And then as I got more skilled and experienced with doing it, I was able to actually bring in my coaching skills, which was something that was present in me, but I was almost like tying it behind my back for fear of saying something incorrect in front of my MBA students. So I don't know if that's resonating with anybody.
There's little mercy with the MBA students, right?
Well, there's little mercy with them, but now, I noticed myself the last number of years going into that classroom and arriving as my full self and using my full self as a way to teach, a way to be present with the students, a way to empathize with the students. One of the things that I noticed is it really curtailed my ability to hold empathy for the students when I was just in my head. So I don't know if that's kind of making sense to folks, but that's kind of what I was thinking about this whole idea of doing and being, and how can we actually bring those two worlds together in a way that's useful for what it is that we're trying to do in that moment.
Yeah, can I say something in response to that?
Yeah.
So I completely agree with what you're saying there, Melissa, and I think for what it really speaks to for me is this lovely concept which was developed in relational organizational gestalt by Denenborn-Chidiac around self-other situation, in which then Georgina Worcester developed into self-team situation. And the concept being that when you're working with a team, you're going to be present to yourself, to the team, or what's happening outside. And unless you're aware of that, it's very easy to become trapped almost by whatever it is that is not the team or not what oneself, in exactly this way that you've just described. And I think one of the ways perhaps to start moving along the continuum, if you like, is developing an awareness of self, of team, of situation, and having the self-awareness, if you like, to recognize when we're not focused on the team. We're too focused on something else. You know, Dorothy, I know you've got a lot to say about this in terms of being out of presence and being triggered and recognizing that and getting back into presence for the team. But, you know, I think exactly as you were saying, Melissa, the moment that we are out of, or the moment that we are thinking about a model or a process or what we're going to say next, or the fact that we were late, or the fact that Steve's uncomfortable, we're no longer in presence with ourselves or the team. And that's I think one of the big, certainly, learnings for me in terms of starting to move along that continuum.
Lovely.
Yeah. But I think that's a little bit where, you know, experience and practice comes in. It's kind of like when you first learn to ride a bicycle, you're trying to pedal and make sure you're keeping your balance and looking where you're going. And it's hard to do all those things simultaneously, right? But then at some point, once the muscle memory kicks in, the amount of cognitive and literal energy you're expending drastically reduces. And then you have almost more bandwidth to be present, right? So I think there is something about that. I'll just pop these questions up from time to time. If anybody's inspired to, you know, respond to these, we can, and, you know, weave them in. But I don't know if any of you guys want to respond to this question right now, if that stimulates any good
Krister, I'd
thoughts.
like to build on your earlier comment about, you know, when people are first learning team coaching. So I think we all agree that we master the art of presence. The more we become self-aware, the more we reflect about our practice. But I still have the opportunity to train and coach team coaches at least once a year. And I think this is a concept that they really do struggle with, that I think there would be benefit into bringing this learning earlier on. And I think a lot of people might be doing team coaching without accessing these learning opportunities until it's much too late, in a way that they haven't been able to be fully present with the team or fully offer their authentic selves to that team. And I think, you know, if we could create those opportunities, it would be so invaluable. And there's one thing that Phil always said to me that always struck me. And so I came from the world of OD and had been working with teams for many years before I came into team coaching. And Phil always said to me, if you're doing too much work, then you're not doing team coaching. And it struck me because I share that with other coaches, because I think they often feel that I have to create value. I have to intervene more than I am. And I think that takes them away from being present and being in the moment with the team and observing what happens. So how do we create a little bit more balance, perhaps, early on, so that they can truly benefit and that the teams can benefit from what they're offering?
Because it's such a rich source of data if you do that work, isn't it? Where you're kind of, I remember the very first coaching training that I did. I had this wonderful mentor who said the quality of the intervention, there's this association to the quality of the coach and how that coach shows up. So that even speaks to that question that popped up, is presence a constant, or is it something that moves? For me, it absolutely has to move, because, no matter how deep I go in my own self-awareness, there will always be something new to learn and something new to evolve. So for me, presence is moving with that sense of self-exploration and self-examination. Dorothy, I don't know, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, especially around, if bringing in every part of ourselves, including, what's showing up for me physically in this moment, and am I tuning into that information, or am I using my cognitive brain to try and block out that information? I'd love to hear more about that, Dorothy.
Well, Melissa, I think, and between the conversation you just had with Michelle and Sebastian, I think this just shows you why it's so difficult, because everything we've just said is all true. So that's what makes it so, what learning and where to know presence is important in all the stages of learning, but sometimes we're not present. And I think, actually, Melissa, when you tell the story as the youngster versus the professor that you are now, it's interesting. You probably look at those earlier Melissa selves and just maybe, like I do, say, oh, I did not use my anxiety or my failure in a very present way. And today, with permission, I look at things that make me anxious or uncertain, and I'm positive that I'm not the only one. So that's the first way, Brene Brown talks about using your vulnerability. Well, it's very hard to use your vulnerability unless you're courageous with the right people, because you actually need courage to be present with something that may feel difficult, uncertain how it's going to be received. And yet some of those things that we are present to, that we voice, that we reveal to others, are exactly the thing that other people were hiding or not sure how to touch. And if we can touch them, if we are present to that data of the moment, our insecurity, this is confusing, I'm not sure what you said, all these kind of, then it releases all the people to be more present with what they were not aware they could lean into. Mm-hmm. So there's a phenomena. I ask myself very often, what is it that makes this so jazzy for people? Because it's a liberation. And use that. And isn't that extraordinary? Something between improv and understanding how to live life without a guide. So that's actually why I think leaders who can use, and sometimes I think when we see leaders who are really present, it means whatever happens, they can make a comment, they can recognize it, they can weave in, oh, you just said something that's like I have in my family, or that's like we're doing at work, or in this past to this COVID thing that we've all come through. The leaders who are able to say to people, I was scared. I understood that. Someone in my family had COVID. I wasn't sure we were going to keep them. Those people, those leaders who were present to the human experience are also the leaders that we talked about.
Dora, it seems like we're having a little bit of issues with your connection.
Yes.
We're getting most of what you've been saying, but your connection's a little bit coming in and out. So I don't know if there's something you can check. I don't know if you heard that, Dorothy, but we're having some little issues with your connection, but yeah. Sebastian,
how about now?
Yeah, conscious that Ian asked the question a little while ago, and we haven't actually really addressed that, or only partly. Because I was wondering whether we might address.
Dive in.
I'm not quite sure in what sense you're meaning constant there, Ian, because to my mind, everyone has presence, as we've been discussing. Is the presence same across different cultures? Well, because it's personal, it's individual to each person. I don't think it is constant in the sense that everyone's is different, but everyone has a presence. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but I think my other observation is that if you accept that presence is the sum of who we are, our experience, our culture, our beliefs, I suppose it's possible that different cultures might display certain common traits in their in individuals' presence within that culture, but I don't know. I'm going to defer here to Dorothy, perhaps, or Michelle, who might have more experience of that.
I'm curious as to why the question came the way it did, because I'm not sure how to interpret it. I think we agree that presence, everyone has presence. But I'm curious as to why the question, does it vary from culture to culture? I'm wondering if Ian might be able to expand on that in the chat room.
Yeah. My just reaction to that is it sounds like we are more or less present. So we are always present to a greater or lesser degree. And whether, again, that's cultivated as a skill and we have awareness around that, I think probably varies based on our training and our experience and the like. But on the culture standpoint, I think culture moderates everything in human behavior. And so there may be culturally appropriate or inappropriate ways to show up, just physically, what you dress. Did you arrive late or on time? Time is important in some cultures, not so much, it's more fluid in other cultures. So I would think there's lots of variability around how we show up. But I almost feel like sometimes as a team coach, I sometimes show up with the intention, like, for example, using somatic practices, which a lot of people don't ever experience, sometimes over the course of their whole working career, which is kind of counterculture in a way, but oftentimes is very powerful. A quick story of that: I was coaching the leadership team of an international relations school a long time ago, and I was sitting in the office of the dean of the school and two leaders. So it was a small team I was coaching, and I was just struck that there just wasn't flow going in our session. The dean was sitting behind his big wooden desk, very imposing, intimidating. The three of us were like on the other side of the desk, like students. There were senior leaders there and the other leaders. And it just felt like something in my body said, this doesn't feel right. Now, fortunately, I had gone through the Coaches Training Institute and we did a lot of work on embodiment. We called it geography in that training, but it's using physical space. And it was such a beautiful day outside. And I just said, I finally, is after years, got the courage to say, you know what, guys, I just don't think we're really flowing here. And I'm just really aware that the dean, you're sitting behind the desk, we're sitting over here. There's a lot of like barriers between us. And I can't help but say that I'm completely distracted by how beautiful of the day it is outside. It was like spring and warm and sunny. And I said, you know what? My gut is just telling me we need to get up and go out of this building and go for a walk and have our session walking today. And it was like one of the best team coaching sessions of my life. And that led to, actually, we decided as a result of that session, never to have a team coaching session in the dean's office ever again. And we kept going to different parts of the campus, sometimes outside, sometimes inside, and really use the physical spaces, multiple spaces, as a way to create, the space for our coaching session. So anyways, that's just one little example of it. And I have plenty of stories where in my inability to be present or to name what was going on and just take the risk, I think that really had the opposite effect of really, team coaching sessions that probably never really got any traction. So anyways, that's a little bit how I kind of respond to Ian's point about just the constancy or lack of constancy and, different cultural. But I think for them, just physically walking completely broke the culture of the normal way we tended to meet, in person, if we're not on Zoom, which is to sit around a board table. And we always laugh when we go in and the board tables take up 80% of the room and people are physically really far away from each other just because that's the way we have developed a culture of meeting. So I don't know if that's a little bit of an aside, but anyways, that's my response to that one.
It's an interesting part of presence and being present and using ourselves as instruments to feel out what might be going on in the team environment. Because what you described there, Krister, is what I call a pattern interrupt. And often when we are trying to bring a team to a place of being instead of doing, we're interrupting the normal patterns and flows of that team. We're getting in the way of their normal rhythms and routines. And sometimes it's received very, very well. And sometimes it's less well received. And then there's always the piece then around, well, where do you go as coach when it's less well received? Your ability to then stay present and stay with it, gets tested kind of moment to moment. I have one little story that I'd love to share, and it kind of goes back to Michelle talking about the team coach practitioners that she trains and the idea of maybe introducing it early. When I did my executive coach training, one of the modules that we did, it wasn't entitled presence or anything like that, but one of the modules was they took us all to an equine center, and we worked with trained equine facilitators and coaches where the first thing that we had to do was to walk up to the horse and introduce yourself. And this whole idea of, you know, walking up to a big horse and introducing yourself, and not through what we do, which is through language. We tend to rely a lot on language as our way of communicating and being with each other. This was all about presence. And, you know, Dorothy talked about the neurons in our brain and the mirroring in our brain. And horses are absolute mirrors for how we're showing up. I don't know if any of you have done this work yourselves, but, you know, if you turn up with a form of open and welcome and centering, you know, the horse is not going to kind of move away from you. But if you show up with any level of dominance or aggression, the horse is going to bolt. And the interesting thing about horses is, of course, they want to be led and they want to know who is the leader. So this is a little bit of a long story, but I think it was my real first awakening around me going deeper on understanding, you know, my authentic self, Dorothy. So we were in these little groups, and the facilitator said, okay, folks, who wants to come up and, you know, do some groundwork with the horse, move them around these different configurations, so on and so forth. And immediately, and I don't say this to be unkind, but immediately all the men in the group took turns. They were straight up there, and they were being, you know, not so successful in terms of how the horse was interacting. So next thing, the facilitator turns around and says, not in an unkind way, but how about you? Because I guess, and he made some reference to, you know, my physicality is small. I'm not a big kind of physical person, but he made some reference to that. So anyway, I went up and I had this amazing experience where the horse just starts moving in this beautiful, you know, synchronous way. And we're doing absolutely great work and great guns, and it was all going great. And for one split second, I lost focus and slipped back into my cognitive game, and the horse and I disconnected. And when I debriefed with the facilitator, they were just like, so what went on? Do you know what went on? And I said, yeah, absolutely. I, you know, got in the flow, as you were talking about, Krister. I got in flow, and then I allowed my brain to wander, and the horse picked up on it immediately. Wow. And I've had so many brilliant experiences. I've taken clients, I've taken teams to do this work so they can see themselves in constellations and all of that. But that was my first real eye-opening moment of, you know, how I needed to figure out with my physicality, with every part of my being, who am I when I show up as a coach? So I thought I'd share that little story with you, and I don't know if it resonates or...
Absolutely. Yeah, I was thinking about it parallels my dog, but Dorothy, I see your hand is up. Yeah.
Well, first of all, I just want to say, Krister, I'm so sorry about my connection, and if it's too
90%'s been good. Yeah.
Well, too non-present, I just want to own that that's my challenge. But, you know, I want to reference this name, Doug Silsby. He's no longer alive. I know. I
have met him, spent time with him. He's a beautiful soul.
I know.
Such a big loss.
I want to say that name because he was so marvelous as a voice about presence. And really, even as I say that to anybody who knows him, you can read his books, The Presence and Coach and Mindful Coaching. But Doug had a wonderful, wonderful exercise that picks up, Melissa, what you're saying. And he would have two people facing each other. And
I think we lost you again there.
Oh, so
I
okay.
think you're back now. Yeah, go ahead.
I wonder,
When
would it help with your video maybe? I know it's not ideal, but
it's not
your
ideal, but
video-
let's say I'm going to stop my camera for a moment. Let's see. But the interesting thing that he would say is allow yourself every time you are distracted to put your hand up. So while you're talking to the person, every time you think about your mother or you think about your dog or you think I should have eaten this morning, put your hand up, because he wanted to encourage all of us to remind ourselves, start tracking when you're present and not present. Like you, Melissa, with the horse. You lost focus for the moment, horse knows it.
gone.
And actually, how present are we? Can we learn, like a muscle, much awareness? Us, as Sebastian was saying, us, the other person, and the moment, and the culture we are part of. I'm from French in Canada, and in Montreal, you can act one way that you can't act in Toronto, and you shouldn't get confused. And that's the way it is. Are you aware? Are you present? So in memory of Doug, I would just say that's what your horse story really told us. We are just like the horse. We know. And we forget that we know.
I'm so glad that you brought up Doug, Dorothy. What a beautiful, beautiful soul. And he came to Ireland, and we had the opportunity to do work with him. And I distinctly remember him saying that Irish people were so in touch with the earth that this whole idea of presence, a big part of that is being in touch with our environment and our earth and our kind of agricultural background, if that makes sense, which is altogether so important for the world that we live in today. But I could have crossed you there, Sebastian. My apologies. But definitely fond memories of Doug Silsby.
And he writes really, really engagingly about presence. Definitely worth reading his book. What I was going to say is that Dorothy, what you were saying there brought to mind, in fact, an exercise that I did with a colleague on a workshop we ran, where you had us, and this was on screen, just the two of us with our eyes closed, trying to get in touch with our each other's presence, but doing it with our eyes closed. And that was a really, really interesting exercise, because I think one of the things it really highlighted is how much noise, how much interference there is in terms of what can take you out of presence. And, I think, as you've been saying, Melissa, this point about, really being in touch with yourself, and the moment you lose that connection, then your external connection is lost as well. That exercise was so powerful in reinforcing that learning.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Michelle, I'm curious.
I had another comment to what Ian said around culture. And it's also, Krister, you sparked it for me. It's also about organization culture. So I'm going to be vulnerable here as a team coach, a bit to one of my not so proud moments. But we all know trust increases when we're vulnerable. And I remember working one day with a global senior leadership team of a bank. And I remember thinking to myself, man, they're so slow compared to the team that I was working with last week. They are just not getting it. They're not moving on. What's going on? Is it me? Like all these thoughts taking me out of the moment. And I think that we run this challenge too, particularly when we're coaching very distinct teams with very distinct cultures organizationally, and when we're doing them in close proximity with one another, because we are drawn outside of that moment by the external environment and by our thoughts. And I remember having to refocus myself and say, okay, this is a different team. This team is going to do it their own way. I need just to sit back and be with them and observe it. And it was incredibly frustrating compared to the experience I'd had the week before with the other team. And it was, I had to bite my tongue. I had to count to 10. I had to really focus on what everyone was saying, and allow just myself to be in that moment. But I do think culture comes up in different ways as well. Like, Dorothy, you were saying like Montreal and Toronto, very different cultures. It's like being in France versus England. But there's organization culture too to think about.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And Michelle, this is the interesting thing, and this is where I think Gestalt coaching is useful. We are the instrument, and can we pick up the data of the group's culture that tells us this group, I cannot do this group the way I did last group. They look like the same kind of group. They may be a leadership, but they have different norms. They have, and they're looking, what am I picking up that I want to catch and ask about? And that is where, are you present? I like to say, to the data of the moment, the different data that tells you what's different about this group.
Yeah.
Can you ask about it? These very small questions are really what the success, failure and success are very close together. Usually it's a question or an observation that we were afraid to make.
I wanted to connect why presence is important, and having skills and presencing, the ability to be actively shaping the environment and the space through different techniques and just where you show up. But I think it has something to do with psychological safety, and I want to connect it to culture as well, because on the one hand, I think our job as team coaches is to make people feel safe enough where we can reduce anxiety, get people hopefully a little bit less performance or focused and a bit more focused on learning, because actually when we are in a learning mindset, we're more creative, we're more likely to take risks, we're more likely to perform better. And so on the one hand, we want to create enough safety, and I think presence and different techniques we can do that can help people get fully present, not just in their minds, but in their emotions, their bodies, etc. But then there's another thing, which is actually, I think we need to actually make teams a little unsafe in order to move out of their habitual ways of working, which I see over and over again. I work with a lot of senior leadership teams, and it's very cognitive. It's very kind of power oriented, subduing people through argument and persuasion and rank and authority. And it's it's one set of being that we can pull on, but it's oftentimes very limiting. So I almost feel like we need to respect culture, whether it's national culture, or organizational culture. But also I do think part of our job is to disrupt culture a little bit and to push people beyond norms and practices, which are the antecedents of culture, in new ways. And so one of the things I love to do, I've done this, with top teams of, global banks, even where I'll get 15 leaders to stand up and I take them through one of my favorite exercises is a little group embodiment challenge exercise where the group has to count to 21 in order. But the next number has to come out randomly from a different part of the circle. And they can't create a pattern or point out. They just have to sense. And if two people say the number at the same time, we go back to 1. And usually groups fail at this miserably, and I let them fail 5 times and really stoke the anxiety and performance pressure. But then I have them close their eyes, turn around, and I take them through like a full body scan meditation. And I won't do it now, with breathing. And I have them slow down and I have them sense the space. I take them through the head, the heart, the gut, all through the body. And then I ask them to count to 21, and they almost always nail it. If not the first time, they get it the second time, but the performance always increases. And when I'm done with that exercise, I always ask them, what is in the space now? What's in the room? And you hear these lovely comments, but I had a CEO of the company, the team failed miserably, these 15 bankers. And these are people leading like 100,000 people, tens of billions of dollars of revenue, like these authority figures, so to speak. The CEO came up and high-fived me after the team nailed counting to 21 in this kind of almost spiritual way. And it was great. It just created the whole tone. And it was like a collective sigh of relief, and anxiety swept out of the room. And I swear they would follow me anywhere after that. They would do anything I would ask. I wasn't, trying to abuse my authority. But the point was, I was feeling anxious. It was the most senior team I ever worked with. And within minutes, I had them all standing up, doing something totally out of the normal. And it totally paid off. But I told my colleague that I was there with, I said, either that exercise we were going to get fired and it was going to sink the stock of the pair of us as team coaches, or if we nailed it, we were off to the races. Unfortunately, that worked. But I don't know if anybody else has any stories just around this, but I do think in your paper got into this, Sebastian, around safety, psychological safety, around trust and flow, which is, I think, a big one. And, we even experienced that here on the podcast. Sometimes we get into a flow on these episodes, and sometimes it just never reaches that kind of state where something more than the sum of the parts emerges. But anyways, just want to kick that out and see if you guys have any other stories or comments building on why presence is important. And it's not just a woo-woo, topic out there, right?
Yeah. I actually...
go on, Dorothy.
I'm just going to, thank you so much. I'm just going to follow and just this interesting thing that you just said, all kumbaya safe, like so safe that some people would say boring. It means that it's safe enough to take a risk, to break what is an old paradigm or not working. And safe and real being present is being present to whatever is compelling or interesting or needs attention. So it's a little bit like, what Ron Heifetz from Harvard says, that our job in being present is to disturb others at a rate they can tolerate. And are we willing to be present in that way? I like to call it, can we have safe emergency, where we know that it's safe enough so that people aren't terrified, but disturbing enough so that people would be willing to take a little bit of a risk.
That's lovely.
Love that.
Love that. Yeah. Sebastian, Michelle, Dorothy, Melissa, any other topics here? I know, for me, one of the indicators whether I'm present is whether I lose track of time. And I know we're almost an hour into this episode and I don't have a hard stop, but just want to see what else you guys are thinking about on this topic. I've really enjoyed this conversation. We can continue a bit longer. And if there's any questions the audience listeners have. But yeah, Sebastian, Michelle, Dorothy, anything else you guys are percolating on as you think about this topic?
I think the other big thing for me is how your presence, your relationship with the team, your ability as a coach to create the safe container, and your ability to, co-create the container with the team and maintain it, are all inextricably entwined. And one of the things that's drilled into most of us as coaches is the importance of the relationship. And for me, I think presence is an essential. Well, knowing how your presence impacts the team that you're working with is an incredibly important part of the relationship. And I think knowing how you're impacting others and how others are impacting you is a fundamental way that we as team coaches might choose to work with teams. That somatic experience really.
Yeah. I'm conscious of something that we haven't talked about is when we show up as a pair of team coaches. So I guess Krister referenced it there, this move is either going to get us fired on the spot or it's going to be the making of us, right? And we often have, we often have those moments, right? But I guess there's something about, being present with the team, what's going on for them, being present with the system that they find themselves in, and not being, kind of so drawn into their story that we're ignoring that, there's probably lots of other stories going on in the wider system with stakeholders and all of that. And then also recognizing that, when we show up as a pair of team coaches, which I always have, that's, there's something about us being able to stay in synergy in the room and being able to, recognize when we're in flow and recognize when for whatever reason, we've come out of relationship, and this is now having an impact on the work that we're doing. I guess one of the things that I've developed in my practice as a way of being able to work with that live in the moment, if I find myself, in the middle of a team coaching session and I've just no idea where we're going or what we're doing, or if there's something that I want to name, using the Gestalt Cape Cod methodology. Are any of you familiar with using that, where you engage in a conversation with your team coach partner, allowing the team to listen into that conversation as a way of not just resetting with my coach, but also as a way of doing that interruptive pattern with the team and interrupting what was going on to bring them to a new place. I'm seeing a lot of nodding heads, so I'd love to hear of your experience of using that methodology and when it's effective, when it's not.
I think as a Gestalt person, I wanted to say yes, and it's which. So I'm just aware again, Krister, just to honor your time issue, but with us. But one of the things about presence within a team context is being able to handle the truth of the moment, which is multiple truths. And how do we check out which truth do we need to respond here? In a group context, in a team context, is being able just to say, everyone, can you say right now what you're paying attention to? Or this whole group, what are we missing that we need to attend to before we close? Or what did we finish that really everyone is going to take out of the session that really matters? Being able to grab the what in the now and be present to that. So that exercise that you pointed out is beautiful. If you want to build connection and relationship within a team, and sometimes to have them do it together, could each of you talk to each other about what you are taking from this that others might want to hear, and do rounds of fish bowling for that? So I think that we have techniques, and I think that they are awareness technique, a team situation, how to be present to what would be of value to the team in the moment, and being present to ourselves.
I love that, Dorothy. And being compassionate with ourselves, that sometimes we get that right, and sometimes we get it completely wrong, and that's okay, because that's also part of us demonstrating our humanity. I love that. Yeah.
Right now, and Sean is actually agreeing.
High risk. One of the things I remember when I was going through one of my coach trainings was they said, if you're not coaching on the edge where you're almost, sorry, there goes my co-pilot, my
there's
coworker
Zippy.
here is lighting
Dog
up.
heard you.
Zippy, stop barking. I was going to say that, I'll see if he loosens up. Maybe there's something present about that he's sensing that I'm not, because my dog, like your horses, Melissa, seems to have extrasensory perception. So we can learn so many things from animals. But the point was in the coach training was that if you're not coaching on the edge of almost getting fired, you're probably not coaching at the level you need to in service of your client. I mean, getting fired is a little bit drastic, but like if you're not taking risk and you're playing it too safe, you're probably too far back from the line. And I think there is this dancing on the edge. And so for Sean, I mean, whether improv is the right one, I would say, check in with yourself, and you're probably, if you're feeling some fear, that's probably a good sign. That means you're stretching, and maybe taking that risk may pay off. It may be a quality failure as well. And, how we recover from failure, I think also matters. It's about, getting back on the horse, using that analogy as quickly as possible. But we have to take risks. Sometimes we're going to overshoot the boundary. It may pay off handsomely, and sometimes it might be a quality fail. And I think if you can use humor and say, boy, that just really bombed, you might get some laughs out of the group and pivot into something else, And so I would say, go for it if you think it might really cause the shift in the dynamic of that group. So Yeah.
Sean, we'd love to have you on, actually, because one of our dear colleagues, Mark Edmond, does a lot around improv as well. We also have David Matthew Pryor that comes from a theatre background. So I think we could get a really nice session going on this whole idea of bringing improv to team coaching and seeing where that takes us. So we're very excited for you to experiment and for us to all learn from your experiment.
do let us know. There's also a question from Claudia around, are there practices to get centered with your co-team coach? Because that's a whole nother ball game. Working with another coach can sometimes be, you can be less than the sum of the parts, sometimes equal to, and sometimes more than the sum of the parts. But I don't know if anybody wants to respond to Claudia's question.
I can address that. I think there's a couple of things to think about, and it's talking about, what your strengths are, what your challenges are, being really open and vulnerable with each other, talking about your abilities to be present or not present, what might distract you, how you could support one another, having that conversation around how you can support each other in the moment when it appears that maybe one of you might be distracted. Is it like, if you're doing it face to face, is it a touch on the shoulder or the arm, saying, I want to be the lead, or I want to step back, or, giving that look that, I need help here, not sure where we're going. I think all of those things are really important. And I think too, there's a whole art of being present, showing up well in advance, making sure you're both prepared and comfortable, doing some deep breathing perhaps, or mindfulness work together. All of those things can help. And I think too, being really supportive of one another, not just during the session, but also debriefing with each other afterwards. What have you learned? What did you notice about the system, the trends? What did you learn about being present for each other? All of that can be really, really rich. And then if you can bring that back into your learning, I think it's that social learning process of how am I improving ourselves as a pair of team coaches? How are we creating more impact for the team? And I love to share two things. One is I actually introduce and frame with the teams that I'm working with right up front that they are going to be uncomfortable at times, because my role is to take them out of their learning, their comfort zone. If they're not out of their comfort zone, then they're not truly learning. And they need to learn in order to change. That's why they're there. And the other thing I'll share quickly is an acronym. I call it FAIL. And the first time it happens, whether it's with me or my partner or us together or whether the team, is FAIL stands for first attempt in learning. And failures are something to be celebrated if we can learn from them and use that experience. One last little practice. A practice that we do in TCI for co-coaches is actually doing mirroring exercises. So you would learn this in theater training or improv training, but you actually have one person be person A, and then they start, and then the other person mirrors them with whatever they are doing. And that's about the balance and the flow, and then you reverse it, let the other person take the lead. And I found it very awkward and intimidating at first. I'm like, what the heck are they making me do here? And then I realized the value of it afterwards. But it takes a mindset to be open to trying new things like that and realizing it is presence and flow.
Love that, Michelle.
Yeah.
Colleagues, I think we're going to start to bring this to a bit of a close. And Dorothy, are you needing to pop off?
No, I just wanted to say to the Claudia question, just real quick.
Okay.
I love when people can walk together non-verbally, and see how you maintain awareness of each other. So often in co-leading as a coaching pair, we lose track of each other's interventions, and then, we have a sense of failure. And you could learn to be more aware of each other and walk together.
Beautiful.
Love that.
Sebastian, I think you were going to say something. Dorothy, your connection there was great, by the way. Go ahead, Sebastian.
I was simply going to say that, being deliberate in your contracting with your co-coach is as important as being deliberate in your contracting with the team.
Yeah. And recontracting. So it's just this continuous loop and cycle, isn't it? I love that, Sebastian. Would you like to just tell us a little bit about your doctoral research? Are you continuing with this topic and theme, or what's the question you're hoping to ask?
Yeah, so thanks, Melissa. So what I'm researching is how team members and team coaches perceive their coaching to be productive. So what I'm trying to understand is what are the elements or what's driving perceptions that team coaching has been helpful or valuable or beneficial to teams, looking at it from team members and team coaches' perspective. And I love that you're doing work around social learning, because I think one of the things that's going over in my mind is that if we focus too much on goals and outcomes, we lose sight of the learning and the insights that are developed during the coaching that allow the teams to change and be different.
Lovely. Well, we'll have to have you on again to hear more as to how that evolves and unpacks, and if in any way the wider community can support you with that research, by all means, keep in touch with us on it.
Thank you.
Lovely.
Yeah.
So colleagues, I think we could start to maybe bring today's conversation down. I always think like we're always starting to get warmed up as we get towards the end, but just being mindful of your time and respectful of that. I want to be present to that. But maybe we could just do a go round of a kind of closing comment, thought, parting inspiration or advice for the listeners. Anything you'd like to say in closing? I'll just start off by saying really enjoyed this conversation. Again, my metric is whether I kind of lose awareness of time, and it just kind of takes on a life of its own. And I think today's episode did that. And so I'm enjoying that. And yeah, I think it just brings back a lot of fond memories of really the beauty of this work and the privilege we get to do this work, and, cultivating presence and that, those skills in ourselves and what we bring to teams is just is a wonderful gift that not only I think pays dividends for the teams that we work with in organizations, but developing as more full human beings. And I think that's what is so attractive about doing this work. So thank you all for coming today. Great topic. And I'm sure more to come from all of you and from this topic in the future and future episodes. So who would like to go next? We'd love to hear from each of you in closing here.
Okay, I'll go. So look, firstly, thank you, Krister and Melissa, for inviting me on, and a big thank you as well to Michelle and Dorothy for agreeing to jump on and share their thoughts too, and particularly for sharing their time in the original research. So thank you. All I would say is I think it's something that presence is something that will develop as one keeps on working on it. And you don't suddenly wake up one day being fully conscious of your presence. It's something you chip away, and the more you think about it, the more self-aware you become. So that's certainly a journey that I'm on. And if anybody listening is interested and wants to carry on the conversation about presence, very happy to do that. Feel free to reach out to me separately.
Thanks, Sebastian.
Great.
Wonderful, Sebastian. Perhaps I'll follow you while I still have interconnect. Everybody, it's a metaphor of presence, but I think
We lost you again, Dorothy. Michelle, maybe you could pick it up while we get Dorothy back.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you very much, Sebastian, for your work and your research that you've done in presencing and inviting me to participate in that research as well, and to join everyone today. Krister, Melissa, for hosting the great conversation that we all had. And if I could add perhaps one piece of advice, especially to those in team coaching, is to challenge yourself to take yourself out of your comfort zone too. And if you haven't had the opportunity to learn about yourself, to increase your self-awareness, how you might be an instrument of change, and how to be fully present with the team and to create presence, do it. It has increased my what I think would be my perceived benefit and value that I add to clients, as well as my knowledge because of the ability to take that data as it comes to me so tremendously. I would absolutely recommend some formal training in it.
Beautiful. Dorothy, how are you getting on?
You're muted, Melissa.
Sorry, I don't know how that happened. I may pop in while we're waiting for Dorothy to find a good spot in the house. So I guess what today has really reminded me of and being restorative around is, there's a real piece around presence and our humanity. And it's this moment to moment thing, and that we're all a work in progress, and that's absolutely okay. So as we're developing our team coaching capacity and skills, just to remind ourselves not to take ourselves too seriously, to be compassionate with ourselves, and that in itself makes us more compassionate with those that we're working with. So that's what this conversation brings for me on a Friday, which is a lovely way to end the week. And then just in terms of sharing another practice, so Dorothy mentioned when she did the work with Doug Silsby that it was raise your hand. When I did that exercise with Doug Silsby, he handed us all out, those kind of little jingle bells that you can get in your hand. And I still to this day carry around a huge bag of those when I'm going to work with teams, when I'm going to teach my MBA students, and set up little partner conversations. And I'm kind of bringing about the idea of this isn't a test of how well you tell a story. This is an opportunity for you to give a gift to the person that you're partnered with, for them to tune into how present they can be and how well they listen. So if I don't hear those bells jingling, I know that you're probably not being totally truthful in this endeavor. So that's just another way of doing the same thing. Dorothy, you're back to us, and we'll give you the final word.
Oh, Melissa, what an invite to everybody. This team has just been a joy to be with all of you. Krister, thanks for organizing it. I think the thing I want to just say is, if you want to really learn about your presence, allow yourself to be in a team context.
Love that.
If you think about your presence, a team will teach you your nuances of self, and are you available to use the richness of yourself in the presence of others?
Wow, beautiful, poetic.
Lovely.
Well, everyone, thank you so much for tuning in. Again, we're having these sessions every Friday, so we look forward to seeing you back. Next week, I believe we have Peter Hawkins and one of his colleagues coming back.
That's right.
Been on this show multiple times, but coming back to speak a little bit about the frontiers in team coaching. So we're looking forward to that session. Please do join us and continue the conversation in the team coaching learning community on LinkedIn. And this episode will be live on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and all the podcast platforms probably later today, if not today, by tomorrow. So we'll be getting this out to time-friendly zones for others who couldn't make it live today. But thank you all, Sebastian, Michelle, Dorothy. Happy St. Patrick's Day. I hope you guys have a great finish to your Friday. And we look forward to seeing you again
Wishing everybody
soon.
peace on this day. Green is the color of peace, and we really need that for the world today.
Indeed.
Absolutely.
Well said. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye now.
Bye.
Joyful. Bye.